and we can move on to bigger, better, and more pleasant things. American culture and society during the Cold War. And the first thing we'll look at is technology, which was growing by leaps and bounds in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Let's take a look. First off, let's look at the world of health technology, not just learning how to be better doctors, but getting new tools and how to do that. World War II is over, and we have a lot of extra time and a lot of extra money to spend on other things. And one thing we spend a lot of time and money on is health research. In 1955, Jonas Salk invented a vaccine that would cure polio, which is pretty amazing. Polio had caused about 60,000 cases every single year, mostly of children. Many of these children died. The ones who did not die were often crippled or even bedridden for the rest of their life. It's a pretty terrible disease, and it starts very slowly. It makes your feet paralyzed, and then your lower legs, and then your thighs, and then the disease works up. And if that disease paralyzes your diaphragm, well, then you can't breathe anymore. So thankfully, years before, someone had invented an iron lung, which was the name of this giant machine that they actually put you inside of the machine, and it changes the air pressure around your body to force air in and suck air out of your lungs. Not very pleasant, and you were bedridden. You had to be stuck in that machine 24/7. As soon as they take you out of the machine, you can't breathe anymore. Right? So once your body recovers of polio, if it does recover, you might get limited muscle use back, but you might be completely paralyzed. Whatever muscles were affected, you might never ever use again. So really nasty disease, highly infectious disease, mostly among kids. You can see here on the cover of Time magazine, uh, this system of braces meant to help someone walk who has very limited mobility. Maybe those leg muscles are not 100% paralyzed, but are severely weakened. And so, with the use of these braces and two crutches, this person might be able to walk. Today, do you know how many people get polio in America? Zero, all because of Jonas Salk's inoculation, his vaccine. Just a few years later, in 1962, Albert Bruce Sabin invented an oral vaccine. So you don't need to get a shot, you can just swallow this. Now, this is not only more pleasant for kids, that's not the main issue. The main issue is it's way easier to administer. There's lots of different kinds of shots that need to be administered differently. Some need to go into fat, some need to go into muscle, some need to go directly into a blood vessel. And you can't just have anyone jab you with a needle. It has to be done right, or it might not work very effectively. When he invents this drinkable liquid that works as a polio vaccine, that's pretty amazing because anyone could administer it and any kid could take this. It could be shipped off to places where there are no medical personnel, and you just have to read the instructions, drink 1 tablespoon. Okay, I can do that. Really easy. Uh, Here's a quote from him. A scientist who is also a human being cannot rest while knowledge which might be used to reduce suffering rests on the shelf. So he made it his life's goal to reduce suffering through new medicines. Pretty cool. This next guy, Dr. Maurice Ralph Hilleman, developed about 40 vaccines for different things. He was a vaccine specialist. He's still alive today. He made the vast majority of vaccines that kids are recommended for getting today, including measles, mumps, meningitis, hepatitis A and B, and pneumonia, and many other lesser known things, but also very important. So measles, if you didn't know, is like chickenpox, only deadly. Measles used to kill about 250,000 people in the 1600s in Europe every year. So adjusting for population, that would be like if measles killed, I don't know, 30 million people a year today. And today, no one gets measles. Very, very few people get measles. Unfortunately, in the last decade, there's been a large uptick in people who won't get the measles vaccine. So there's actually been a lot more cases in America. So that's not good. Mumps is large red bumps and swellings that can also be deadly and is highly infectious. Meningitis, your meninges are these blood vessel coverings, I guess. I think it has something to do with your brain. There's some kind of covering in your brain that itis means swelling, so swelling in the brain, not a good combination. Hepa means your liver, so hepatitis is swelling of the liver, and obviously you need your liver. And there's multiple different diseases that cause swelling of the liver. So I think there's three main hepatitis causing diseases: hepatitis A, B, and C, and those can be deadly or at least debilitating, life altering, really not good. Pneumonia is when your lungs fill up with liquid. Also, of course, very, very dangerous, especially for the elderly and the young. And there's multiple things that can cause pneumonia, different bacteria and viruses. But if you can get medicine for that, you're good. Mr. Hilleman has saved tens of millions of lives. Put him together with these other vaccine doctors. Vaccines have saved dozens of millions of lives in the last 50, 75 years or so. It's pretty amazing what modern science can do. Next, in the area of cancer. Fun fact, cancer, maybe you've heard of the Cancer the crab, the constellation in the sky. Cancer is the Greek word for crab. And the ancient Greek doctors thought that these tumors in your body looked like little lumpy crabs for some reason. I don't know, so there is a connection there. In 1949, they invented the first chemotherapy. That is a chemical that goes in your bloodstream and targets the cancer and kills the cancer and not the rest of you. Now, there's hundreds of different types of medicines that are classified as chemotherapy. That's just chemicals that attack cancer or boost your immune system to attack the cancer yourself. There's lots of different chemicals doing lots of different strategies. Some of these are really, really nasty. They are bad chemicals. They're highly toxic. But hopefully they can target the cancer more than they target the rest of you, target healthy tissue. And chemotherapy has made cancer much more survivable. There are three main routes to destroy cancer: chemotherapy, radiation, which is shooting the cancer with like a microwave beam, a laser kind of, to try to burn it out, and then of course surgery, trying to physically remove it. And there's lots of different kinds of cancers, but there are so many new strategies that cancer is not a death sentence anymore like it used to be. There are many cancers that 100 years ago you would be dead in a month, and today you can have another 10 years or 15 or 20 years of life, if not be completely cured, which is pretty amazing. And let's keep up the good work and find cures for other types of cancers. In the 1950s, researchers first proved that tobacco causes cancer. Smoking causes mostly cancer of the lungs and throat. Chewing causes a lot more cancer in the mouth, but also the esophagus. And they did all these tests and studies and proved without any doubt that tobacco does cause cancer. And so we have the very first anti-smoking campaigns in the 1950s. But smoking was a huge part of American society and culture. It's just what everyone did. It's a symbol of manliness and coolness, and it took a long time to get rid of. I remember even when I was younger, smoking was very, very common. You'd see people outside the grocery store smoking all the time. You'd see people inside restaurants smoking. Today, it is illegal to smoke indoors all across America, and we have a lot less smoking than we used to, which is good. Smoking is very, very bad for you. In 1971, Nixon signed the National Cancer Act, which spent a couple $100 million on cancer research. This is the first major medical funding from the government, and the government continues to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on medical research of all kinds, trying to improve the lives of its citizens and save the lives of its citizens. There are some projects that are just so insanely expensive that they really would not happen without government funding. So that's nice that the government is spending some of its money in a useful way. Next, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is of course that chemical that is inside our nuclei of our cells that tells our ribosomes what kind of proteins to make, and therefore, how to build the body. In the 1860s, they found the chemical, which that is insane. How before the Civil War, they found this chemical called deoxyribonucleic acid. They had no idea what it was. They just had discovered this chemical that's inside the nuclei of cells. It was not until the 1940s that we figured out what DNA was. That DNA tells your body what to do, and you get your DNA from your parents. Therefore, you get instructions from your parents on how to build your body, and every aspect of your body is controlled by your DNA. That was incredibly complicated. You might have 50 different genes that tell you, what color and shape and size your hair is and how much hair you have. Is it going to be thick? Is it going to be thin, wavy, curly, black, brown, what shade, blonde, red, whatever. You might have tons and tons of different genes, and your body picks and chooses which ones to listen to. You probably have the DNA for several shades of brown, black, and blonde hair in your body. It's just some of the DNA is turned on and some of it isn't. Some of it's dominant, some of it's recessive. It is insanely complicated. But in the 1940s, we begun unraveling those secrets. These two very young gentlemen are Crick and Watson, and they're famous for first figuring out that DNA is in this double helix. It's in this double spiral shape. And they figured that out in 1953 and won a Nobel Prize in science for that. Very, very impressive that they could do that in 1953. They did work on the basis of someone else's work. This is Rosalind Franklin. She was a very brilliant scientist, one of the very few top level scientists who was also a woman. She got famous for figuring out about holes in coal. I went down a rabbit trail looking up Rosalind Franklin. Apparently, coal is permeous. Is that how you say it? Yeah. It has pores in it, okay, little holes in the coal. But some types of coal lets water through, and some types of coal does not. And people didn't know. And I don't know why this was important, but she spent years studying this and grinding up coal to different sizes of dust, and she found out a lot of interesting chemistry about the makeup of coal and wrote like 6 research papers on it. She had a PhD. She was incredibly brilliant, and at that time there were only a handful of women with her skill set. Anyway, this picture down here, I'm sorry, I'm kind of in the way. This picture is called Picture 31, and it is actually an X-ray photograph of DNA. It's hard to tell what it is, but apparently Crick and Watson used her ideas about DNA and that photograph to come to their own conclusions. So when they won the Nobel Prize, they argued that it should be Crick, Watson, and Franklin all sharing that Nobel Prize, but she had just died, and the Nobel Committee never gives out prizes to dead people, no posthumous prizes. That is why Gandhi never got a Peace Prize. The year they're going to give it to him, he had already passed away. So Rosalind Franklin, don't forget her name. And there's a more modern picture of that DNA, a double helix shape. We have the 2 phosphate chains on the side, and then you have ATCG inside. Pretty cool. In 1990, we started the Human Genome Project, which was dedicated to identify every single one of these genes. So humans have 24,000 genes. Each one of those genes is made up of, I don't even know how many different chemical bonds here, but we're talking about millions and millions and millions of pieces of information. And how could we map that entire thing out? Well, a lot of very clever people took a very long time looking at DNA and finally figured out all 24,000 genes. It's pretty amazing. You can read the human genome online. There are databases where you might want to look this up. It says, ATCAA, GC, ATTA, CCC, whatever. And it tells you the human genome. It's quite fascinating. During the Human Genome Project, we learned what a lot of these genes were responsible for. This gene is responsible for making your eyes. This gene is responsible for your nose. This gene is responsible for making red blood cells, everything, all sorts of things. And we figured out a lot of our sicknesses and diseases are caused by damaged or bad genes. So now you can get screened for a whole lot of different diseases, and they'll say if your genes look like this, you're 20% more likely to get cancer. If it looks like this, you're 30% more likely to get osteoporosis when you're old. All sorts of very interesting things you can learn about your genes. You can screen for cancer. Now we know that cancer does alter your DNA, and you can find cancerous cells in your waste and in your blood. And now we can have a DNA test for cancer. Very interesting. We can have DNA tests for like crime scenes. That's pretty cool. And then of course just for, I don't know, personal information, 23andMe type thing. Um, that's fun. That's interesting. Organ donation. At first, we knew that different blood types are incompatible with one another, and we found that out the hard way. Look up different blood types mixed together on YouTube or something. If you pour little drops of different types of blood in a petri dish, it goes bad, spectacularly bad. Look that up sometime. It's very interesting. But now we know that there's a lot more to it than just blood type when you go to donate an organ. The big problem with donating an organ is that the host body might think it's an outsider and attack it and try to kill it and reject that organ. So the closer it is to your previously failed organ, the better chance that your body will accept it. So that now when you go to get screened to see if you're an organ match, they might look at a couple hundred different genes and see, is this the same as the other guy? Make sure that has a good chance at being kept in the body. Moving along. Other health advances in 1954 was the first successful kidney transplant. The internet says this is the guy who got a kidney transplant. I don't know. Interesting. It does say first successful. That does tell me that they were probably a few unsuccessful ones before then. And this is organ transplants is a brand new science, but they were able to do it. This guy lived for many more years after that. Kidney transplants are very, very straightforward. The kidney is connected to your body with just 3 different tubes, just 3 different connections. You have blood going in, blood coming out, the veins and arteries and veins. I always got the two confused. Then, of course, you have the ureter with the urine coming out. So there's just 3 things you need to sever and fix up, which means it's really, really safe and easy. Compared to a heart transplant, you know how much volume of blood is going through your heart, and it's so complicated. So many different veins and arteries going everywhere. A heart transplant is incredibly complicated. Kidney transplant, super, super easy, comparatively speaking. Over a decade later, 1968, we had the first successful adult heart transplant. Very interesting. Apparently, they found out that your body does much better if you get a heart and lung transplant. Excuse me. Excuse me. So sometimes they will give sick patients a heart and lung transplant, even if they only need the heart. Just, I don't know, kind of weird, but there you go. In the 1970s, they invented MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging. So this is a very, I don't know, I find it creepy. You go in there and there is a giant electromagnet that magnetizes your entire body. See, in magnetic, take a magnetized piece of metal or even just a regular old bar magnet. The magnetic force of every atom is pointing in one direction. Now, every atom, every molecule has a magnetic north and south pole, but usually it's so jumbled up, one's pointing this way, one's pointing that way, one's pointing that way, so they all cancel each other out. Most things are not magnetic. They have to be aligned just perfectly. Well, if you put anything into an insanely strong magnetic field, that'll automatically align every atom and molecule the exact same direction. And that's what they do to your body in an MRI. They just put you inside the biggest magnetic field you will ever see. It's a stinking big magnetic field. It is so big that if you have any metal in your body, that metal is kind of like putting metal in a microwave, if you've ever seen that. So they make very sure to, they empty your pockets. They get you in a hospital gown. You do not want to be wearing a belt. I've heard stories about people with metal fillings where their mouths are just like, and they have to emergency stop it. That's not good. Earrings, nose rings, belly button rings. You don't want to be wearing jewelry inside an MRI. But anyway, when they align all the molecules in your body and then let it revert back, I'm not entirely sure how, but they do map the inside of your body. So it's very much like an X-ray, only X-rays pretty much just show different densities, whereas the MRI can see a lot more information than just where the bones are. It's very, very helpful as a diagnostic tool. I've never been in one, but maybe when I'm older, my back goes out. In 1980, psychologists first identified PTSD as a big concern. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not just something for soldiers in combat. It's for anyone who has trauma, who has traumatic stress. There are kids who have PTSD because they're living in bad family situations. There's adults who get PTSD from a bad work environment, even from a bad breakup. If there is severe trauma, if you are in a big car crash, and that was very scary. If something happens, if you witness something scary happen, you can get PTSD, and that is a series of symptoms. Some of the more classic symptoms include high anxiety, not liking to be around big crowds, loud noises and bright lights can be triggering. Um, Often flashbacks. So at just random times, you are reminded, and it's like you're right back there in the traumatic scene. Bad dreams, lack of sleep, and it can be a severely debilitating problem. Now, it can be helped an awful lot with a combination of therapy and medicine. It can be incredibly helpful. But back in the day, soldiers who had these issues, and kids and adults who had these issues were basically told to suck it up, buttercup, and were let alone. Even today, when we know that PTSD is a major problem for veterans coming home, we don't always catch it, and we don't always do very good by our veterans. We're getting better, thankfully. But very sad fact that a huge percentage of the homeless people in America are veterans. And that's not because they can't find a job. It's because they can't hold down a job. They either quit or don't show up or are fired because they're not capable of working because of this crippling PTSD. And unfortunately, there are quite a few veteran suicides. I think I heard about 11 a day in America, and that's really sad. We need to take care of these people who, put their lives on the line for their country. We need to make sure that when they come back, we're taking care of them. And part of that means just being a good friend. If you know someone with PTSD, just being understanding and helping them out any way you can. And now we come to everyone's favorite part of the Cold War that did not involve nukes, the space race, space exploration. Pretty fun and exciting. Uh, America and Russia were rivals in all areas. We were both trying to prove that our way of life is better than the other. And one way that we were rivals is in technology, and rocket technology was at the top of a lot of people's to-do lists because you can use rockets in war. But then, of course, there are scientific applications for rockets as well. A lot of the early space race was done with nuclear missiles. Of course, you take out the nuke and you put on some other kind of payload, satellite. All the early satellites were put up into space with converted ICBMs. In fact, a lot of people went into space on what used to be nukes. You take out the nuke, you put in a person, and boom, you go up in space. So kind of crazy. And then, of course, the more scientific information you get, the better missiles you can make. And there were definitely a lot of real world applications in the space race. A lot of people say that we spend too much money on NASA, but NASA's invented a whole lot of really cool stuff for the space race that we use in everyday life. I'll just give you a couple examples. Barcodes. The space shuttle had so many tiny little parts that were custom made. They had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little gadgets and parts that they need to make the space shuttle. So to keep tabs on all of them, some dude invented the barcode system where you can just scan a tag and it'll tell you exactly where that piece needs to go. Brilliant. We use that every day in America today. That's awesome. I believe Saran wrap was invented by NASA. That's pretty cool. The Super Soaker water gun, that was invented by a NASA engineer in his spare time. He's a black guy, and he was working on space stuff. I don't know, and he found this kind of piston that I think was used for like fuel injection or something. And he said, "Oh, this would be fun if we put water in it and squirted someone." And so he invented the Super Soaker and sold it, and I don't know if he's made a fortune, but the company has. That's pretty cool. Lots of other things. Look it up sometime. In October 1957, the USSR surprised us by announcing to the world, guess what? We have a satellite in orbit. We had no idea. Sputnik first, little guy, 4 antennae, and it's just circling the Earth, going beep, 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 beep. And that was wildly impressive for the entire world. Russia is far ahead in the space race. Next month, they sent Sputnik 2, which went even higher, is bigger, better, and higher, and they beat us again. So Congress said, we can't let Russia be the technological powerhouse of the world. That's got to be us. And so we spent $40 billion on NASA. And on January 31, 1958, so about a year later, we sent up our first satellite. These three men threw it really hard. Oh, there you go. Very different design. That's cool. Russia beat us in the space race to almost every valid and interesting achievement. They got a lot of firsts. Does anyone recognize this puppy? Very good girl. Her name is Laika, and she was a stray that the Soviets found on the streets of Moscow and crammed her in a spaceship and sent her up to space and monitored her vital signs as she went around the Earth a few times. They did not pioneer uh, getting a spaceship back to Earth for many more years. So unfortunately, Leica, she did not survive the trip. She survived long enough to prove that yes, living things can go in space, but she did not make it, unfortunately. But they gave her a statue in Moscow, so that makes up for it. This is Yuri Gagarin. He was the very first human in space, or was he? There's a lot of conspiracy theories that say that Russia actually covered up a lot of their failures and that they actually had multiple deaths in the space race that they never told anyone. So it's possible that the first few people in space died in the attempt. The Russian spacecraft were not the most reliable. I mean, neither were the Americans, but the Russian spacecraft were not very reliable, and unfortunately, I would not put it past the Russians to have some casualties and just never tell anyone. First person in space just went up, came back down. This is Valentina Tereshkova. She is the first woman in space. Russians were always very gender inclusive. They wanted everyone to work for Mother Russia. So they got women in space before we got men in space. This is Alexei Leonev. He is the first one to exit the spacecraft and test the spacesuit out in real life. He's connected to the spacecraft by what's called an umbilical cord. It's this hose with oxygen and stuff that keeps him there. First person out in space. Pretty cool. They got the first photos of the far side of the moon ever. This is the very first time we have ever seen the far side of the moon. They got a satellite to go all the way around and come back and send us those photos. That is really impressive. Now, the photos aren't that great, unfortunately, but it's really impressive because these satellites were controlled by radio signals. They're remote control robots. And once you go on the other side of the moon, of course, the radio signals can't reach. So it's on the other side of the moon for like 38 minutes or something. Maybe it was longer than that, but it was a good while it was completely out of contact. And then it comes on the other side, everyone's biting their fingernails. This is going to work. And then it starts transmitting radio signals with these images in it, and everyone's like, hey. Pretty cool. They sent their first robot to smash into the moon. I'm not sure why they would do that, but they did. That was on purpose. They had their first impact on the moon. They also had the first robot softly and gently land on the moon. They had the first sample return from the moon, getting moon rocks and stuff back to Earth. Now that is very, very impressive. They had the first planetary flyby. They sent a robot to fly by Venus and take a bunch of pictures, and there she blows, has its own ship's wheel. They had the first multi-person crew, a spaceship that could hold 3. That's cool. They had the first space station up there. That's pretty cool. So they had to go up in multiple different trips and then assemble it together. and then you can have people in there. It is very, very, very tiny. Notice the solar sails. Um, yeah, I think they had the second space station up there as well. Um, it's pretty cool. Eventually, the world started working on the International Space Station, and multiple different nations paid for and built different sections of it and keep on adding parts to the International Space Station today. That's pretty cool. They had their first impact on Mars and the first soft landing on Mars. That's pretty cool. Hey, America just put a robot on Mars a few weeks ago. We've just put up the first helicopter on Mars. There's a little drone in Mars right now. Look it up. There's some really fascinating footage of helicopters on Mars today. We're still part of space exploration and doing a whole lot of things. Very, very, very interesting. America was late to the party, but we did get some very impressive and interesting firsts as well. We had the first solar panel powered satellite. That is probably a model. I'm 90% sure that is a model he's holding. That is itty bitty. That's way smaller than Sputnik. I don't think that could be the real thing. But you can see there's a few solar panels. They look about the size of a calculator solar panel. There's several antennae going different directions. Hmm. They had the first communication, I should say, first communication satellite. This was for a TV station. This is called Telstar 1. Does it look familiar to you? This is R2-D2. It's impossible that George Lucas invented R2-D2 off the top of his head. This is R2-D2. Telstar 1. Pretty cool. We had the first weather satellite up there as well, tracking weather formations, hurricanes, and stuff. Because you used to have almost no warning from a hurricane, almost none at all. The barometer would drop and you get some windy days, and then all of a sudden there's a massive hurricane on top of you. And today we can get weeks warning, depending on where you are. We can track that hurricane in lifetime, and that has saved I don't know how many lives getting people out of the area. It's really not safe to stay in most places when a hurricane is coming. They're just so massive and so powerful. The best choice is really to evacuate, to leave. There will be widespread devastation. We had the first spy satellite, and that was a major boon for us. We had pictures that could find nukes in Cuba. Very helpful for us. Here's taking a couple pictures of tanks and stuff. Now sneak attacks are a thing of the past. We know exactly where enemy forces are and where they're going. We have so many spy satellites up there. It's insane. We have satellites that can do a whole lot of different things. We can take black and white photos. We can take color photos. We can take photos so good. Someone in space can read your book over your shoulder. I've seen satellite photos that print is clearly visible. That's crazy. Facial recognition from the sky. That's creepy. But we also have things like infrared sensors that can tell if tanks and airplanes and battleships are turned on or not. The infrared looks at the heat signatures. So if we fly by over a tank depot and there's 10,000 tanks here, if all of a sudden every single tank engine is turned on and is warming up, we're like, oh no, that's a problem. Uh, that's so cool. We have radar and things. We can look through clouds, even if there's a dense cloud cover that blocks visible pictures. We can take pictures with other things. We have used these spy satellites to do some scientific things as well, like measure how big the Earth is to within like a millimeter. It's pretty awesome. We had the first satellite recovered from orbit, so it comes up, it goes up, it comes down safely. That's pretty cool, reusable. If we can recover an object from orbit, now we can recover a person from orbit, or a puppy. We set up the first monkey in space. I think this is a joke picture. I don't think that's real. I think that's from Space Force. I saw the first few minutes of it and I got really bored. I don't know. There is a real picture. They put a thingamabobber on his head to measure his stress levels to see if he's stressing out too much. He has a little bottle there, some water or something. They see if he's stressed. I don't think he survived. However, he is mummified and he is in the the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. I have seen him. I was wandering through about 6 or 7 years ago, and there is a mummified monkey in a spacesuit. It was really creepy. This whole trip to DC, I was looking for a present to bring back for baby Clara. I don't think Molly was born yet. Clara must have been, how many years ago was this? Maybe this was about 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, I finally found in the Air and Space Museum a stuffed teddy monkey with a spacesuit. It was so cute. It's around here somewhere, I think. I should find it and bring it in. It's so cute. We had the first flyby of Mars. That's interesting. And this really takes the cake. By far, the most impressive part of the space race is actually getting to the moon with a human being, and we did that. We have sent many people to the moon. No other nation has sent people to the moon. Several other nations have sent robots. The European Space Agency has, China has, Russia has, but no one has sent human beings to the moon. The only humans on the moon have been American. USA. Uh, China was talking about trying to send someone to the moon, and people were wondering what would happen if they went up to the moon and knocked down our flag or replaced it with a Chinese flag. And I'm pretty sure we would send someone to the moon to go replace it. But that's so cool. I love this picture. What a classic. And by the way, yes, we have gone to the moon. It's not possible to have been faked. We have been to the moon. All right, American space exploration. This is the pilots of Project Mercury, our very first mission. These are all single person missions, so these guys didn't go up all at once, just one at a time. Notice their early spacesuit design, very different from Neil Armstrong's. These Mercury capsules were tiny. They were tiny, 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 tiny. And that would be strapped on top of a nuclear missile, obviously minus the nuke. So take out the bomb, put a person on the top, in the cone. So itty bitty, they were cramped in there. They'd only be gone for a few hours, like 4 or 5 hours. They'd go up, do something in space, and come right back down. Alan Shepard was the first American in space. John Glenn was the first American to orbit around the Earth. And when you're in a fast enough orbit, you can go around the Earth in like just a few minutes, like 8 minutes or something ridiculous. Yeah, crazy. Project Gemini came next, and Gemini means twins, so of course this is a two-person manned mission project. Project Gemini's whole thing was just getting ready for going to the moon. I think that is why we got to the moon but way before Russia did, and Russia kind of gave up and never even tried, is that from the beginning, the moon was our goal. So Russia's getting all these low-hanging fruit, these easy accomplishments. I'm not easy by far, it is literal rocket science, but comparatively easy. And America says, we're going to the moon. And so we're going to prepare to go to the moon. And who cares about all these other firsts? We're going to the moon. So Project Gemini had to practice a lot of things that would be necessary for going to the moon, including spacewalks, um, being in space for several days at a time, docking one spaceship into another in space. That's pretty crazy. Um, Going outside, extravehicular activity for hours at a time to see what would happen, all sorts of different things. So each one had a different test that they would run. So excuse me, let's see what we can do. And that all led up to Project Apollo, which was even bigger spacecraft, three-person manned missions, and they were designed to go to the moon and go around the moon and finally land on the moon and come back. Uh, there were quite a few Apollo missions. Apollo 8 is famous for, while it's orbiting the moon on Christmas Eve 1968, they read the Bible. They read Genesis, looking down at the earth, reading about how God created the earth on orbit around the moon. That's pretty cool. So let's hear that. Apollo 11 was, of course, the famous one that finally did get to the moon. Neil Armstrong, very first person on the moon. You should remember that name, Neil Armstrong. He passed away a few years ago. Buzz Aldrin, is he still alive? I think he's still alive. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first two people on the moon. It is a three-man mission, though. Michael Collins had to stay in an orbiter because after this little landing craft gets back up into orbit, it would have to connect with the command module to get all the way home. This little guy did not have enough fuel to make it all the way home, so someone had to stay up in orbit, making sure that you could dock with the lander here. Notice one of these gentlemen is doing the salute to the American flag. In the back, there is a little like RV four-wheeler type thing, lunar rover. They did a whole bunch of cool stuff up there. Of course, Neil Armstrong's famous phrase, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." They took a lot of pictures. They brought back soil samples, rock samples. They left behind a flag, which is still there. The flag is unfortunately most likely bleached white by this time. There's just so intense UV rays there. If you ever had a carpet or maybe outdoor like patio furniture get really faded in the sunlight, that is after our atmosphere blocks out the vast majority of ultraviolet radiation. So when there's fabric up on the moon for decades at a time, it is gone. It is very poor quality now. It is bleached beyond recognition. So we should go up there and put another one, shouldn't we? They left footprints, and those footprints are probably still there. There is no wind on the moon to wash away the footprints. There is no water on the moon to wash away the footprints. There is solar radiation, which might crumble them after enough time. And of course, if there's any craters, if there's any meteorites hitting, that would throw up a bunch of dust and shake the moon. There are moonquakes. There are earthquakes on the moon. And if there's a bad enough one, that might settle the dust enough to erase those footprints. But those footprints are still there. The tire tracks are still there in almost pristine condition. It's pretty cool. Here is the tip of the missile that brought him there. Notice that you have the command module in the front, then a big old engine, then the lunar module underneath that. And here's the rest of the missile. Notice how it's a multiple stage rocket. Does anyone know why you'd have several stages on your rocket? That's right. It's because the rocket is so heavy. The fuel is so heavy. The fuel tanks are so heavy. If you have just one big fuel tank, you're lifting that heavy load all the way up. But if you have multiple smaller fuel tanks, you can drop one fuel tank as soon as it's empty, and then you don't have to carry that with you anymore. And when you're going up into space, every ounce matters. So just look at that first stage. Look at how heavy that must be. It uses up all its fuel and then just drops. Then the second stage goes, uses up all its fuel, then drops. Excuse me. Then the third stage, use up all its fuel and then drop.
Houston, this Neil, radio check.
help improve relations with Russia, we staged a joint exercise called the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project, where we docked an Apollo module with a Soyuz module, and we had, was it 3 Americans and 2 Russians working side by side on multiple different procedures, just showing that we can work together for the betterment of mankind. We can work together for a better future without threatening to nuke each other. Very noble goal. And really, the space race started off intense rivalry, but ended up much more friendly rivalry. And at the end of the space race, we had scientists working with one another, going to Moscow, coming to DC, NASA, Houston, all these places, and sharing their ideas with one another, working together. And that is one thing that helped thaw out the Cold War. It's hard to say which did what. Obviously, as the Cold War thaws, people are more willing to work. But then as people are more willing to work together, cooperate, that does help even more. So they helped each other. In 1981, we launched our first space shuttle. The space shuttle, when I was little, I thought the space shuttle went to the moon. It did not. Space shuttles do not have the range to go to the moon. Space shuttles are basically planes that go up into orbit. They're meant to be reusable, and they're meant to carry a huge, huge payload. So if you look right here, the people stay right up here. And then this is just one massive fuel tank and cargo bay. But the back of the space shuttle opens up, and this big claw comes out, and it can carry all sorts of stuff into space. Carry parts of a space station to put up into orbit, a satellite, Hubble Space Telescope, all sorts of fun stuff can go in there. So it is a heavy lift vehicle. And then it can come down and glide through our atmosphere and land on a runway. So that's pretty epic, pretty cool. Notice there are different stages, kind of. There's this big old copper tank with liquid fuel, and then there are these 2 small white booster rockets, and I believe those are solid fuel. And those can be captured. They bring it up and drop down. You can recapture them and fill them up again. So reusable, saves us a lot of money. Unfortunately, in 1986, after I don't know how many successful missions, many, many, many successful missions, 5 years of using the space shuttles a lot, we decided to put our first teacher into space, Sally Ride, first teacher, not the first one, but one of the first women. I believe she was the first civilian in space. She goes up there, and school kids are watching all across America. All America is watching live, and it blows up. And this was a national tragedy. It was a shock. Something went wrong, and it blew up. Very sad. But this on national TV, it really set the space race back a bit as we got too scared to keep on going, and then we pulled back our speed an awful lot. And in 1990, we put the Hubble Space Telescope up in space. This is really cool because light from distant stars travels billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of miles all the way to Earth, and is traveling through empty space, and that light is completely unchanged until it hits our air, and the air distorts it. The other day we had a little campfire in our backyard, and there's all this hot air rising, and it's making this ripple effect in the air. That's due to different densities of hot and cold air. And Claire is looking through, and she says, "Daddy, why are the trees all wiggly?" I thought that was just so funny. That's what it's like looking at stars and planets through our atmosphere. There's all this distortion due to our air. So how can we mitigate that? Well, one solution is put telescopes high on mountains. Less air, literally less air. It works. We do that. Much better solution. What if we put a satellite in orbit? Unfortunately, the Hubble Space Telescope was like broken from the minute we put it up there, and we needed to put people up there again to fix something. But as soon as they did it, it has the most fantastic, amazing pictures. There's no light pollution, and there's no air distortion, and it has done so much over the years. It's fantastic. We're putting up an even bigger, better satellite telescope soon. That's going to be like twice as big, like 100 times the power. It's going to be awesome when we do that. Let's see something about the space shuttle.